We will now hear from Brian Becker, who's the National Coordinator of the Answer Coalition, Act Now to Stop War and End Racism. Please welcome Brian.
In a few minutes, we'll be making an approach to the White House to deliver more than 100,000 signatures of people in the United States and around the world who demand that the Cuban Five, who have been in prison now for 10 years, simply because they tried to prevent additional terrorist actions against the people of Cuba, against the government of Cuba, and against the Cuban Revolution. We don't know what kind of response we'll get in a minute or two when we take these petitions, because up until now, the Bush administration has done everything it can in its last 8 years to punish the people of Cuba, to carry out additional imposed economic sanctions and military threats. And they have harbored Luis Posada Carriles, who shot down a civilian airliner that brought Cuban young people, mainly young athletes, in 1976, while he was an operative for the Central Intelligence Agency. So we don't expect much of a good reception from George W. Bush, but our appeal is to the people of the United States and to the world who seek justice. Yesterday, all around the country and around the world, there were events commemorating the September 11th attacks. When the September 11th attacks happened, the Cuban government and the Cuban people expressed their solidarity with all of those who suffered as a result of this attack. The response from the Bush administration, however, was to intensify terrorist actions against the people of Cuba. Yesterday and the days before, Cuba has been ravaged by a terrible hurricane, the third in a row. And yet Condoleezza Rice, speaking on behalf of Bush, said now is not the time to end the blockade of Cuba. If there was ever a time to end the blockade of Cuba, of course it would be right now. When the people in New Orleans and Mississippi suffered from Katrina, the Cubans assembled 1,100 doctors and rescue workers and made it clear that politics would be secondary as part of the humanitarian effort to help the people of New Orleans. They did more than Bush did. They did more than FEMA did. They reached out. And yet, as the people of Cuba are enduring this terrible suffering as a consequence of another so-called natural disaster, the Bush administration seeks to take advantage of that disaster for political ends, mainly to overthrow the Cuban Revolution, to return Cuba to a position of neo-colonial slavery. What were the Cuban Five doing? They were infiltrating CIA-backed organizations that have planted bombs, hijacked planes, shot down civilian airliners. As Wayne put it, when George Bush said, if you harbor terrorists, you are terrorism. Right now we're in front of the White House and we have to say today that the biggest terrorists of all are those who have invaded Iraq, taking the lives of 1 million Iraqis, seeking to subvert the government in Venezuela or Bolivia, as they're doing right now, continuing to undermine and subvert the right of the Cuban people to determine their own destiny. We stand here today representing, we believe, the broad section of public opinion around the world that demands the release of the Five and demands that the criminal blockade of Cuba that seeks to use food and medicine as a weapon in order to carry out regime change, that must come to an end. So we're here to say end the blockade of Cuba and free the Cuban Five, and we believe they will be free. And so in a few seconds, I invite you to join us as we make that journey to the doors of the White House, demanding that Bush accept these 100,000 petitions and demanding that the U.S. government stop its war against the Cuban people. Thank you very much.